We're going to be talking about the difference between your matrimonial home and
a principal
residence. So apparently people get this a little mixed up. So we decided, since it is our goal and job and professional obligation to educate you all, this is what we're here for.
So we're going to talk about the distinction in terms of the legal meaning of two words that oftentimes are confused. In Canada and in Ontario, we have what's called a matrimonial home, which is what most people think it is. It's the family residence. You could have more than one. You could have a cottage, you could have a home, you could have a ski chalet, you could have a condo in Florida, and they're all occupied at various times throughout the year as a home. And then there's this other thing called a principal residence, which under Canadian tax law is a property that if you sell and make a profit on it, you don't pay tax on it. And so oftentimes people confuse the two different terms, and that's what we were going to talk about today.
And that's for now also, by the way, the principal and no tax, because they're fighting for the possibility of actually taxing your principal residence. But they haven't won yet, so we're good still. So
yeah, in various regimes throughout the world, such as the US, there are different tax provisions. So for example, in Canada, when you pay your mortgage or your property taxes or your home insurance, those expenses are not deductible against your income. And the reason for that is because those expenses are against the profit that you're making on your house. But if the profit on your house is tax-free, then it makes sense that you cannot deduct those expenses against an income or a gain that is otherwise tax-free. Whereas in the US, you can deduct your mortgage payments because in various parts of the US, the money that you make on the sale of your home is taxable income. And so in many respects, we're fortunate in Canada to have the tax rules in such a way that makes our gains on our principal residence our most valuable asset tax-free. However, not everybody maximizes on that. In fact, some people will have multiple residences, and so therefore they may make more money on their cottage than they make on their principal residence in the city. And that requires careful thought and planning.
So what, when people sort of use, I think they use these words interchangeable, and that's where there seems to be a problem. Tell her to go in under her own name, to ask to join us under Cheryl Graff. So I think what's important is for, perhaps you can explain to the viewers what the difference is from a legal point of view and a protection point of view when it comes to properties that are principal properties versus matrimonial. Like, what makes up a matrimonial home? As you've already mentioned, it doesn't have to be the one place that you live in and it has to do with the taxes, but rather the multiple homes that you may own together.
So you can only have one principal residence. And again, when you hear the words principal residence, think free of tax. So those words go hand in hand. If you declare something to be your principal residence, it's free of tax. And you could only have one.
And are you able to pick which one that is?
Yes.
For example, I just had a client call me and they own what I would call their principal property home in Aurora, and they are going to be renting a property in Toronto as they build another property in Toronto.
Well, let's make this very simple. The property that has the greatest gain or potential gain should be your principal residence. So if, for example, you have a $500,000 condo in Toronto, but a $2 million cottage in Muskoka, the likelihood is that you're going to earn greater gains on your Muskoka property by sheer value. I mean, if both properties go up by 5%, you're going to make more money on the $2 million asset than you would on the $500,000 asset.
Of course.
Now, is it possible to make more money on the $500,000 asset than the cottage at $2 million? Yeah, it's possible. It's possible that the cottage will stay the same value or go down in value, whereas the $500,000 Bay and Bloor condo might go up by $300,000. So in that case, it may make more sense to designate the Toronto condo as your principal residence and not the cottage. But generally speaking, the one that has greater value is the one that is going to earn a greater income. And when you sell it, or you're deemed to have sold it because of changes, for example, in your tax status, maybe you giving up Canadian residency, and so therefore there's a deemed disposition. In those situations, you want the property that has the greatest embedded tax gain to be the one labeled your principal residence, because you do not want to pay tax on that gain.
Okay, and as it relates to divorce and those going through it and or protection, how does that factor in with you and your clients?
So some people will make the goal of tax savings or creditor proofing to be their primary goal. So what's an example of that? Some people will put a property in the name of their spouse and not in their name. And they will do so in order to avoid that asset potentially being executed against should there be a judgment against them, say, in business or for negligence. So the typical scenario is a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, an accountant will put properties in their spouse's name in order to avoid those properties potentially serving as an asset that a claimant, a plaintiff, could sue and take away should there be a judgment. The choice to do that has its consequences, because if you put a property in your spouse's name, you're relying on Ontario family law to ensure that that still remains yours. However, by doing so, you've actually now relinquished legal ownership of the property. And so bringing it back to the interplay between principal residence and a matrimonial home is a property that is labeled your matrimonial home under Ontario family law for the purposes of protecting the ownership and the right to occupy the property. So for example, if you have a matrimonial home and it's in the wife's name and the couple splits up and the wife wants the husband to move out, the law protects the husband because it's a matrimonial home. She cannot evict him even though it's in her name. So that's an example of the use of the matrimonial home designation under Ontario family law. The other right is if it's a matrimonial home and, for example, you brought it into marriage. So let's just say a couple meets, dates, and gets married, and the boyfriend or fiance moves into the wife's condo. And on the date that he moves in, the condo's worth $1 million. And on the day they split up, the condo's worth $1.8 million. Normally, he would only be entitled to the gain of the $800,000, half of which is $400,000. But because it's a matrimonial home, he's technically entitled to half of the 1.8, because the matrimonial home laws are there to protect both spouses. Because historically, let's go back 20, 30, 50, 100 years, historically, the house was probably purchased with the money earned by the husband. And so then, in order to protect the wives, historically, the law gave the wives protection to say, this house that may be in your husband's name, might have been accumulated due to the work and the savings and the earnings of the husband, irrespective of all of that, you're entitled to half of it. And that was a means of protecting the weaker financial party, which in most cases was the wife. These days, strangely enough, it is the opposite now. There's many, many situations where the woman in the relationship is the one with the greater income and the greater assets and may have brought into the marriage the home. And so the same laws that were originally built in order to protect the wife are now there to protect the husband. And by the way, this also applies in same-sex relationships as well.
And this was, whoops.
We're still here.
That was a little commercial break. I hope you guys got to see something fun. But just to continue from where I was just making a comment that there's a Netflix series, I forget the name of what I'm watching, but it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it's funny because I guess this is probably, I don't know if it's the true story of how things worked in her history, but she went with the example of representing.
We should just keep touching it so it doesn't.
Go ahead. We're telling your followers.
RBG.
It's saying it's live, which means the whole beginning's gone. If it's telling the followers that you're started a live video, I'm not sure. Anyways, but RBG was saying that one of her first cases, I think she sort of set off to set her whole career on fire, basically, was a male nurse and protecting a male for the same rights, because if it was a female, like it was just a role reversal, basically,
right.
And going into everything.
So bringing it back to the matrimonial home and principal residence, the takeaway for our viewers is this, that you can have multiple matrimonial homes. What determines a matrimonial home is basically just living in it. So if you live in it and you've lived in it all the way through until the date of separation, it's a matrimonial home.
And that doesn't matter how long you live in it, whether it's a cottage, for example, or a place in Florida. Those are all part
That's
of
right. So in a typical family, they might spend
homes.
6 months in the Toronto house, 3 months in the Muskoka property, 1 month in the ski chalet, and then another month and a half in the Florida condo. And if they have all been used and occupied as though it was a family residence when they were there, then those properties are considered matrimonial homes, and therefore they're protected under Ontario family law, to the point where a person cannot sell or refinance it without their spouse's written consent, and it cannot be you cannot evict a spouse from it, even though the property might be in one person's name. Whereas the principal residence provisions is simply one to ensure that the one property that you choose to be the principal residence is the one that, if you sell or you're deemed to have sold, the gains on it are tax-free. Which takes it right back to your line of work, Sam, real estate. The truth of the matter is, there's very few laws left in Canada that allow somebody to make money and not pay tax on it. And one of the few that are left is the principal residence exemption. So if you make $1 million,
and I wonder if that's why they're considering,
possibly,
if
you make $100,000 a year on your principal residence, and you've made $100,000 a year for the 5 years that you own it, so you've made $500,000 from the time that you bought till the time that you sold, it's tax-free, which in effect means that you would have to have earned double that, or at least 30% more than that, in order to have ended up with the same net income. So if you otherwise earn money in the stock market or rental income, investment income, selling shares, employment income, all of those other forms of income are otherwise taxable. But the principal residence exemption is one of the few remaining tax-exempt forms of income generation.
So it's super important, everybody, that you are aware of these details, and you know the difference between a principal residence and matrimonial home and or homes. And you can reach out to Steve to double check on those at Benmor Family Law Group, or feel free to reach out to the Graff girls, because I got some access to Benmor Family Law Group right here.
So just some take-home tips. If you are in the market to buy a cottage, think about and get proper legal and financial and accounting advice from the experts to determine how you should position the purchase of that second property so as to maximize both your principal residence exemption and therefore protect those gains from taxes, but also try to figure out how this affects you with respect to your marital status, your possible separation, if that should happen. And secondly, take-home tip is if you're looking to move up, remember that one of the greatest strategies of wealth accumulation and wealth preservation is trying to avoid and defer the greatest amount of tax. And buying and selling and moving up within your family home is a very smart move for the purposes of increasing your family wealth without having to actually share that with the government of Canada through taxes.
And we also have special professionals that we've dealt with and have referred for those services as well. So feel free to reach out for our concierge little book. And we hope that this information has helped you, and we wish you a fantastic Tuesday. So
be well. Take care.
Thanks so much. Stay safe and stay healthy.